Good morning, dear ones, and welcome to the Unity of Claremont Sunday lesson for July the 26th, 2020. Today's lesson is taken from the book of Esther, and I'm calling it The Undercover Bride. I really am enjoying creating these talks for you, and I certainly hope that you enjoy them as much as I enjoy creating them. We're going to begin, of course, with a little bit of the context in which this story is set. This amazing and very popular story of Queen Esther. So, what was the Babylonian exile? In the 6th century BC, the kingdom of Judah was conquered by the Babylonians. That king whose name is impossible to pronounce, King Nebuchadnezzar. I hope I said it right. But then the Babylonian kingdom was conquered by the Persians. The Babylonians had the policy of taking all of the elites of any conquered country and either killing them or bringing them back to Babylon. And that's what happened in this famous picture that you see here. Jerusalem was sacked, the temple was burned to the ground. That was the end of what is called the First Temple era. The temple that was built by Solomon was burned to the ground by the Babylonians. And many of the people, along with the aristocracy, were exported to Babylon. But as I said, then the Babylonian kingdom was conquered by the Persians. This that you see here is the extent of the Persian Empire, and it at the time was the biggest empire that the world had ever known. You can see there their capital, which is pretty much smack dab in the middle of Susa, and Judah is way over there on what was for them the West Coast. This particular story presents us with King Ahasuerus. Now, actually, in history, they can't find any King Ahasuerus. There's different theories that King Ahasuerus really represents Xerxes the First, or maybe Xerxes the Second, or maybe Xerxes the Third, depending on what biblical scholar has what theory. But here you see an actual relief from the period of the emperor of this great empire, and that is his scepter there in his right hand, ruling the largest kingdom empire that the world had known to that time. So here we have King Ahasuerus, and his queen was Queen Vashti. And the story begins with the king celebrating a great victory. He had conquered some other country, and he had a feast that lasted for 6 months. And the whole country participated in this great banquet, this 6-month celebration, which the king financed with food and drink. And at the end of the 6 months, he was a little bit tipsy on wine, and he was bragging about his beautiful queen, Queen Vashti. And he sent his chamberlains to the women's house where the queen resided, and commanded that she come before the assembled lords and ladies who were participating in the palace with him in the last night of his great feast, wearing only her crown, because he wanted everyone to see how beautiful she was. It was the custom of the Persians to marry other royalty from royal houses. And Queen Vashti no doubt had a very privileged upbringing. And she refused. She was not going to come naked, wearing only a crown, before this assembled throng of drunken uh, courtiers. So the king was counseled by his drunken advisors. Look, you can't let the queen not obey you. Word will get out, and pretty soon women throughout the empire will no longer obey their husbands. You've got to do something about this. So he exiled her. Queen Vashti is out of the picture. Actually, she's become a bit of an icon for the feminist movement because she refused to be treated this way. But at any rate, now she's out of the story. So when the king sobered up, he was depressed. He didn't have a queen. He missed Vashti. And his counselor said, well, what you need to do is scour the kingdom for the most beautiful virgin that can be found and get yourself a new queen. And he said, yes, that's the ticket. That's what I need. I need a new queen. One of his administrators, we're not sure exactly what Mordecai did, but there was, this is where Mordecai enters this particular story. Mordecai was like a third generation descendant of the original Jews who were brought in exile from the uh, the original Babylonian conquest. So he and his family were assimilated thoroughly into the Persian culture. But they were still Jewish. They were still proud of their heritage. They were both. They looked and acted and in every respect seemed like Persians, but in fact, in their hearts, they were Jewish. And he had a niece whose parents had died, and he had adopted her. Her name was Hadassah. She was beautiful. And Mordecai had the idea that maybe she could be the next queen of Persia. So he arranges it that she is one of the young virgins gathered up and sent to the harem. The harem is the name for the women's house. And it was kind of a training ground or an academy for uh, how to look and behave in the royal court. And that training lasted for 6 months. So for 6 months, she got good food, she got regular massages with exotic oils, and she was taught how to use makeup and how to dress and all that. And Mordecai made sure that she got the very best of treatment. But before she went into the harem, he counseled her and he said, you can't let them know that you're Jewish. In fact, don't give them your real name. Tell them your name is Esther, which in the Persian language meant myrtle, like the myrtle tree, which was a symbol for hope. So at the end of the 6 months of training and grooming and primping and so forth, she was prepared to be presented to the king, who immediately fell in love with her and chose her above all the other virgins and crowned her as his queen. Now, Mordecai, who is an official, has the indirect ear of the king should he need to communicate in that way. and he learns of a plot by the king's prime minister and some others to kill him. He tells Esther. Esther warns her husband of this plot, and it is investigated and uncovered, and the perpetrators are uh, hanged or whatever they did to traitors in those days. And she tells the king that this information came from Mordecai. But he didn't do anything about it at that time. He just says, okay, put in the annals of the king, you scribes, write this out, that this plot was uncovered by Mordecai, and he saved my life. But now the king has to have a new prime minister, and he chooses a guy named Haman. And he gives Haman his royal ring, which is it has the seal, the royal seal on it, so that Haman can write out royal decrees and seal them with the king's ring. And Haman is a very vain guy. He's really full of himself. And he commands, I'm the prime minister, I'm second in command to the king. Everybody should bow down when they see me. And for the most part they did, but Mordecai refused. And the reason was that there was an ongoing feud, an ancient feud between the Jews and the Amalekites. And Mordecai he was descendant of the Amalekites. So Mordecai would not bow. And this really upset Haman. When it was revealed to the king that it was actually Mordecai, he knew it was Mordecai that had saved him from the coup, but he had not been rewarded. And it came to the king's attention that Mordecai had never been rewarded. So Haman comes before the king, intending to ask the king to punish Mordecai. But before he could say that, the king says, "What should be done for a man if the king wishes to honor him?" And so Haman thinks, oh, the king is going to honor me. And he says, oh, well, if the king wishes to honor someone, that person should be given royal robes and allowed to ride the royal horse and led through the city of Susa with the proclamation, "This is what the king does to one whom he wishes to honor." As the king says, good, go do that for Mordecai, which really, really, really upset Haman. So Haman decides he's going to get even with Mordecai. He's going to show him a thing or two. He can't attack him directly because Mordecai is now an honored administrator in the administration. So he goes to the king and he convinces the king that the Jews in his empire are a cancer. They are a bad influence. They have their own rules and laws, and they keep those laws instead of the king's laws. And they all have to be exterminated. This is the beginning of a long history of different people deciding to exterminate the Jews. So, at this point, note that Haman doesn't know that Esther is Jewish, just like the king doesn't know that Esther is Jewish. So the king agrees, okay, take my signet ring, write out the proclamation, and choose a date, a specific date, on which the Jews will be exterminated. And the way they chose the date was by casting lots. And casting lots is the meaning of the word Purim, which is one of the great feasts of the Jews today. It's the Feast of Purim. So Mordecai gets wind of this. He gets a copy, actually, of this declaration that on a certain date the Jews are going to be all exterminated. He goes to Queen Esther and he explains to her what's going to happen. And he tells her, look, Hadassah, you have got to go to the king and get him to change his mind. You're our only hope. And she says, look, the king hasn't called for me in a month, and it's a crime to enter the presence of the king if you have not been summoned. Mordecai says, look, all of the Jews are going to die if you don't do something, and it's going to get out that you're Jewish. Somebody is going to tell on you, and then you'll be killed. So you don't really have any choice. And she says, all right, go out and tell all of the Jews to fast for 3 days. I'm calling for a 3-day fast so that I will be divinely supported in my mission. And then if I perish, I perish. So she and all of her household over in the women's house, where the queen resided, fasted for 3 days. And after 3 days, she gets all gussied up and she marches over to the main palace where the king sits with his counselors and his officials. And she marches right in before him. I love this picture. This particular slide, I think, is from a movie. Now, when she went into the king's presence without being summoned, she knew that she was breaking the law. Everyone in the room knew that she was breaking the law. And the king knew that if she was breaking the law, it must be really, really important, at least to her. So after fasting for 3 days and just being so overwhelmed with the magnificence of the royal court, she did what any red-blooded woman would do. She fainted. Here she is, fainting into the arms of her ladies-in-waiting. And when she opens her eyes and regains consciousness, there is King Ahasuerus holding her tenderly in his arms and saying, "What is it that you want, dear? Why did you come into my presence?" And she, not wanting to tell him in front of this whole gathering of all these officials what was really going on, she said, "Well, if it please you, I'm asking you to come to a banquet that I have prepared for you." So the next day, the king shows up at Esther's banquet that she's prepared for him over in the women's house. And there's still a good number of people around. And she doesn't feel comfortable telling him in front of all these people still exactly what she wanted or why. So she says, "Well, what I really want is for you and Haman just to have a private dinner with me tomorrow." So he says, "Okie dokie, if that's what you want, that's what we'll do." So the next day, there's a private dinner with Haman and the king. And Queen Esther at that time says to King Ahasuerus, Haman is trying to kill me because he knows that I'm Jewish. And he's doing it by tricking you into signing a proclamation that will exterminate all the Jews in your empire, which will be a great detriment to the empire. And he's just doing it because he doesn't like me. And the king he's outraged, he's confused, he's disappointed, and he just doesn't know what to do. So in this painting, which I really like, you can see that they are very close to an exit into a garden area. So the king gets up and goes out uh, just fuming into the garden, trying to decide what to do. While the king was in the garden, trying to make up his mind, trying to calm down so he could think, Haman begs Queen Esther to have mercy on him. And in his excitement, trying to get her attention, trying to get her to have mercy on him, he touches her. You're not supposed to do that. Even the prime minister was not allowed to touch the queen. And at that moment, King Ahasuerus comes back from the garden and he sees Haman, what he thinks, attacking Queen Esther. And he says, "You attack the queen in my own house? I condemn you." In this particular painting, you can see he's come back, the king has come back with his bodyguards, and they are seizing Haman. The guy with the blanket is going to cover Haman's head. And the exact phraseology in the biblical story is that the king condemned him with a covered face, which actually is a Greek kind of gloss on the story because that was the Greek custom, was to cover the face of a condemned person. So, Haman is executed, and the king turns to Esther, and Esther says, what about my people? And the king says, well, I'm sorry, I already issued the proclamation. So, kings in Persia cannot cancel out a proclamation once it's been made. This is Rembrandt's version of that very dramatic scene of the king finding Haman reaching for the feet of the queen. So now the king needs a new prime minister. And of course, he chooses Mordecai, because this is now the second time that Mordecai has, done something beneficial for him. So he gives him the royal seal, and he says, look, Mordecai, you're the prime minister. I can't retract a royal decree. You figure it out. Here's my ring. So Mordecai and Esther sit down and try to fashion a royal proclamation that will neutralize the situation. And what they came up with was granting the Jews permission to defend themselves and to kill anyone who would attack them. So this second proclamation is sent out through the empire with the royal seal on it that all the Jews were to not only defend themselves, but to massacre anyone or any group that would attempt to harm them. So on the appointed day, there was indeed uh, it's kind of like a civil war between all of the people who wanted to attack the Jews and the Jews defending themselves. Now, the fact that the second decree came under the administration of Mordecai would also have been known throughout the empire. So now there's a Jewish guy as number two. So a lot of people decided, I'm not going to attack the Jews. The prime minister is a Jew. That would be foolish. So that helped a lot. But nevertheless, a lot of people were killed, including Haman and his 10 sons. When the day of the Civil War was over, and by the way, the Jews refused to take any plunder. They would kill their attackers, but they did not take any slaves or steal their houses or goods, because for them, this was uh, like a holy war. So they refused to take any remuneration for it. So on the day after Esther was not satisfied that all of those who were uh, in favor of exterminating the Jews had been eliminated. So she asked for another day in the capital. And the king, of course, was okay with that. And so Mordecai declared that there would be a second day of civil war between anyone who had indicated they were going to dispose of any Jews, and even more people were slaughtered. And Haman and his 10 sons were put up on pikes. And then everybody lived happily ever after. That's the end of the story. So here are modern day Jewish children uh, celebrating the Feast of Purim when Esther saved the Jewish nation. Of course, we have metaphysical meanings for this very entertaining story. The Christ of your being, your true self, has different aspects when it manifests on the physical plane. Charles Fillmore wanted to create a way to think about how, when the Christ manifests in the physical world, what does that look like? How do we experience that? That's how he came up with the idea of the 12 powers: life, faith, understanding, power, imagination, strength, wisdom, love, will, release, order, and zeal. The Christ manifests through all of these 12 powers, which are yours. This is your inheritance. You know, the soul is perfect. The soul doesn't need to grow. But we do need to let the perfection of your true self manifest in the physical world. That's what our journey is about. Each of the 12 powers of the Christ has like a shadow in the physical world. Divine love, which is unconditional self-giving, is shadowed in the human experience. And when it's just purely on the level of sense consciousness, it's like I love chocolate, you know. I'm in love. You fall in love, which everybody knows is something that you will get over, like getting over a cold. And in this particular story, Esther represents the divine love that is part of your true self, the Christ self within. And Ahasuerus represents will. Esther represents the Christ of your being, manifesting as love, and Ahasuerus represents the will at the level of sense consciousness. Now, we all like to think that we have an open mind, but there comes times in our lives when our will is solidified around some ego need, and we're not open. We're not we're not willing to let the heart in to soften the will. The will is the decision making uh, power. And we all know that we have made decisions that had no love in them, no divine love, no spiritual love. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Love is the only power that is capable of transforming an enemy into a friend." So this story is like an allegory about the the harsh, uh, unthinking will of Ahasuerus being softened by the unconditional self-givingness of Christ's love. Before she went in to the presence of the king to ask that her nation be saved, remember that Queen Esther had all of the Jews fast for 3 days. Of course, for her, fasting was a spiritual exercise. She fasted from food and water, but physically, it represents fasting from negative thinking. And we call that, in New Thought, we call that error thinking. Psychologists call it negative thinking. We know that it is negative thinking that draws us into making bad decisions. I'm right now listening to The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. And this is the one note that he plays over and over and over. That if you're not in the present, then you're living in the past or the future. The past is a story that you're telling yourself about what has happened, and living in thinking about the future is thinking about something that hasn't even happened. That the only happiness can be found in the now. Whenever we are thinking negative thoughts, they are based on the story we have told ourselves about our past. That's the particular point where I want to give emphasis in this talk. So much of our emotional distress is caused by negative thinking. There are different ways, there are different tricks to fast from erroneous negative thoughts, which I'm going to share with you now. A few. Negative thoughts can severely drain your energy, making you feel depressed, anxious, and stressed out. Even at its most harmless, they can take a toll on your self-esteem and lead to a self-sabotaging behavior. As with all bad habits, you can break a pattern of repeated negative thinking, and you're capable of that. It's just a little hard work. So I'm going to give you 12 tried and true methods that can promote positivity and encourage those periods of self-pity and sadness that are the enemy of your true self. Number 1, look for the good in life. Seek out good things, and they will come to you. Sometimes we're so used to focusing on the negative that we don't try to find the obvious positive things around us. As such, it's a good idea to build a habit of looking for things. Appreciate the excellent taste of food or drink that you love. Take note of subtle things you like in textures, surfaces, and colors. And appreciate opportunities to learn, grow, or improve yourself. Here's a method that I haven't run into before that I really like. Allow yourself 10 minutes a day to concentrate on your negative thoughts. Sounds crazy, doesn't it? When you're first starting to fight negative thoughts, you might find that you struggle in vain to contain them, and they will eventually overflow and cause problems for you later. So instead of letting this happen, what you can do is set aside time for yourself to experience the negative thoughts. This habit should be a daily practice and take up no more and no less than 10 minutes. And during this time, feel free to think of all the negative things you want. But outside of that time, when you discover a negative thought forming, take note of it and wait. Put it aside in that box and wait for the next 10-minute negative thought session to give it attention. See, I like that. Another method is to find new habits and skills. Instead of trying to eradicate old habits, try something new that will require you to form new habits. You can take an online class. You can create a bucket list of things to try. Maybe tag along with a friend to do something that they enjoy, but that is new to you. Or you might experiment with new recipes or crafts. Method number 4. Take responsibility. It is easy to point fingers or play the victim when life has you feeling down. Here are some common thoughts of a victim mentality. It wasn't my fault. I had no way of knowing. I only did that because I was stressed out. There's nothing I can do about this. And I have no choice, or I had no choice. Such thoughts as these are not helpful. Yes, some situations are outside your control, but at the end of the day, it's your life. You're responsible for the decisions you make. You're accountable for your actions and reactions, and it's time to take control of that. Tip number 5. Replace negativity. Take your negative thoughts and replace them with positive ones. We call these negative thoughts error thoughts, and we call the positive thoughts affirmations. It seems simple, but it can take some getting used to. Some examples of positive affirmations. The good thoughts that you choose to think instead of the negative thinking are: I am intelligent and capable. I am strong. I think positively in all situations. I have the strength to overcome adverse circumstances. I react well to mistakes. I expel negativity and welcome positivity. The next trick for creating a positive frame of mind is about gratitude. Gratitude is a fantastic way to become more positive. It has numerous benefits for both mental and physical health, as well as relationships. You can start a gratitude journal where you record a minimum of 3 things that you're feeling grateful for every day. They can be anything from small, seemingly insignificant things to huge events. Even on bad days, you can probably find 3 things to be grateful for. Tip number 8. Release the negative factors in your environment. Often, we willingly surround ourselves with negativity without even realizing it. Some things you may want to release or minimize in your life are social media, news, and negative people. Tip number 9. Find a silver lining. Every single dark cloud has a silver lining, though it can be hard to see at first. The next time you find yourself in a bad situation, ask yourself how to find that silver lining. Choose to see a painful situation as a learning experience and ask yourself, what can I do differently next time to prevent this? Ask yourself what advice you would give to a friend in this situation, and then take your own advice. Or find one positive side of this event, no matter how small. Tip, Tip 10. Express yourself. Remember that what is suppressed will express. Pent up negativity can burst forth and overflow when you least want it to. That's why expressing that negativity, especially if it's very strong, can help you to overcome those thoughts and switch to positive thinking. Here are some appropriate ways to express negative emotions. You can talk to someone else you trust. You can use art as a form of expression. Draw, write stories, poetry, make music. Or you can rant in a journal or a personal, even a video log. You can dance, sing, or make any art you like. You can express yourself through physical activity. Lift weights, jog, run, punch a punching bag, dance, cycle, or do any other kind of exercise. And of course, you can talk to your head, to yourself. Go ahead and rant out loud about your issues. You can do it in the shower. Tip 11, be kind to others. Making others happy is a great way to make yourself happier. It allows you to shift the focus from yourself and your negative thoughts to the positivity that will spread from your compassion. It'll be contagious and it may even beget more kindness. Tip number 12. Speaking of kindness, be kind to yourself. Humans tend to be harder on themselves than they are on everyone else. We tend to be less forgiving of our own mistakes and say mean things to ourselves. It's crucial, therefore, that you be your own best friend. What does that mean? Well, if you wouldn't say what you're thinking of yourself to your best friend, then you're being cruel to yourself. Treat yourself like you would a dear friend, with all the patience and compassion that entails. Finally, just remember that you're human. You're going to make mistakes, and of course, you're going to have bad days. You're not going to be perfect. That's part of your beauty. Take it easy, be kind. You are a child of God, and you deserve to be treated with compassion, especially from yourself. I invite you to join me in this closing affirmation. My loving decisions express the Christ of my being. Amen. So be it, and so it is. Just a reminder, you can send your love offerings to support Unity of Claremont to Unity of Claremont, Post Office Box 641, Minneota, Florida 34755. This is Nancy Willingham signing off and wishing you a wonderful week until we meet again.